All right, well, I'm gonna get started here. I want to first welcome everyone to this event. I'm very excited to have everyone here. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the panelists that have joined us today. From the Prairie Island Indian community, I'd like to welcome President Shelley Buck. From Fond du Lac, Band of Ojibwe, I believe we have Chairman Kevin Doobie with us. I hope he's on. He will be joining us shortly if he's not here. Joining us from the Red Lake Nation are Secretary Sam Strong and Treasurer Annette Johnson. From the Native American Community Development Institute is President and CEO Robert Lilligren. And joining us from the American Indian Community Development Corporation and recently recovered from COVID-19 herself is the Autumn Dilley. I would like to start by introducing the state party chair of the Minnesota Democratic Farmer Labor Party, Ken Martin. Ken is currently serving his 5th term as the chairman of the Minnesota DFL party, and he has held this post since 2011. Making him the longest serving chair since the inception of the party 75 years ago. The Minnesota DFL has won every statewide election since Ken was elected chairman. Ken was only a senior at Eden Prairie High School when he joined Paul Wellstone's campaign for US Senate. And he did for many people, and as he did, for many people, Senator Wellstone inspired Ken to pursue a political career dedicated to the principle that we all do better when we all do better. Ken has worked tirelessly to rebuild and refocus the DFL around that iconic ideal. And when he was first elected chairman, he inherited a party deeply in debt and reeling from recent defeats. And by building the party to win and to last, Ken has restored Minnesotans' confidence in the DFL. And he made the DFL what it is today, an all-day, year-round party dedicated to organizing communities, empowering the grassroots, electing progressive candidates, and improving the lives of Minnesotans. Given his success as the DFL party chair, Ken was elected by his peers across the country to serve as the president of the Association of State Democratic Chairs in 2017. And he also serves as the vice chair of the Democratic National Committee. And through his national platform, Ken works with state and local party committees to build permanent, long-lasting political infrastructure so they can elect candidates from the school board all the way to the Oval Office. Ken holds a BA in political science and history from the University of Kansas, and he and his wife, Jennifer O'Rourke, live in Eagan with their 2 sons. Welcome, Ken. You have to unmute, Ken. Oh, if somebody can help him with that.
All right, there we go. Well, first off, thank you so much, Rachel. And Rachel didn't introduce herself, but we're so proud that Rachel decided to come back for a second tour of duty this cycle, serving as our Native American Community Engagement Director, a role that she served in so well in 2018, where she helped us organize, mobilize, and turn out the vote in our tribal nations throughout Minnesota, and we're so fortunate to have her leading the charge again this year. I'd also like to thank all of you for being here today with us to discuss an issue of vital importance, the ways in which the COVID-19 pandemic has affected Minnesota's Indigenous communities. To give you a sense of just how important this issue is, there are tribal nations like the Navajo Nation that have seen higher COVID-19 infection rates than New York and New Jersey, the states that most folks think of first when we talk about the epicenters of this outbreak. The members of Minnesota's 11 tribal nations are tough, resilient people. However, time and time again, the United States of America has failed to live up to our legal and moral obligations to our tribal nations. This failure has resulted in self-perpetuating systems of inequity and injustice that long predate the outbreak of COVID-19. These inequities are what has made the COVID-19 outbreak particularly deadly for Indigenous people across the country and here in Minnesota. For too long, we've underfunded, underinvested, and not fulfilled our federal trust responsibility to tribal nations. And as a result, our tribal nations often lack the kinds of educational and employment opportunities that are essential to getting ahead and staying ahead. Now, this structural inequity and injustice has led to tribal nations facing poverty rates that are double the national average and sometimes even higher. These higher rates of poverty have forced generations of family members into a single home, which can further the spread of COVID-19. They've made it more difficult for Indigenous people to stay home, which can further the spread of COVID-19. And they've contributed to increased rates of diabetes for tribal members, which makes COVID-19, as we all know, far more deadly. These chronic illnesses are made even worse by the fact that the US government has consistently underfunded healthcare services for our tribal nations, which has in turn left them more vulnerable to COVID-19. The injustice that Indigenous communities face and the threat posed by COVID-19 are, as we know, inextricably linked. Those injustices cause so much hardship in and of themselves, but they also ensure that when a crisis strikes our nation, its impact is felt most by Indigenous people, and that cannot go on. Until those injustices are corrected and we start living up to our moral and legal obligations to our tribal communities, we will face and continue to face this crisis, and it will continue to have a disproportionate effect on those communities. While the challenges before us are great, so are the people that are stepping up to meet them. I'm looking forward to today's discussion featuring so many distinguished leaders from Minnesota's tribal nations. And I'm thrilled to be here with Shelley Buck and Kevin Dupuis, Sam Strong, Annette Johnson, Robert Lilligren, Autumn Dilley, and of course, Senator Tina Smith and Lieutenant Governor Flanagan, who are two leaders I know and you know that have built a strong record of listening to, partnering with, and working hard on behalf of Minnesota's tribal nations. Senator Smith has proven herself to be a champion for those whose voices go unheard in Washington, D.C., and my longtime friend, Lieutenant Governor Flanagan, has been a stalwart ally of Indigenous communities and marginalized people across Minnesota. So with that, it's my honor to introduce to all of you on the phone, and really she needs no introduction because she's been a friend and champion of all of us on this call tonight. It's my honor to introduce our Lieutenant Governor, Peggy Flanagan of the White Earth Band of Ojibwe, the highest ranking Native woman elected to executive office in the history of the United States of America. Welcome, Peggy.
There we go. Thank you. Bonjour, everybody. It's welcome to my kitchen. It's nice to see everybody, and I'm grateful for this opportunity to be in community with all of you today. As someone who is an extrovert by nature, COVID-19 has been a challenge, and that many of us have needed to stay home, and also in moments of crisis. I think many of us run towards one another, and we've had to not do that, at least physically. And so it's always really wonderful to be with all of you. You're getting the realist version of the Lieutenant Governor today as I'm rocking my Duran Duran t-shirt and my half zip and a ponytail. So like it's all happening. But I'm really grateful. Ken, thank you for that warm introduction, and to Rachel Banks Cupcho for being the driving force behind this conversation today. And of course, our amazing panel of tribal leaders who we're so fortunate to be able to have on this call, as they also have been like leading and navigating through COVID-19 and so many other issues. So it is incumbent upon us to bring these issues to light, and I'm just grateful for their leadership, and remain humbled whenever I get to be in the same room, either in person or virtually. I don't have a whole lot to say other than really lifting up the good work of Senator Tina Smith. She certainly left some big shoes to fill in the Lieutenant Governor's office. And to be very candid, I would never have entertained being Lieutenant Governor if it hadn't been for the leadership that Lieutenant Governor Smith showed in her role of changing the way that this office engages with the governor, but also across the entire state. And so I'm grateful for her for leading the way and giving me a kick in the pants to step up and to say yes when that invitation came my way. We're really lucky also to have her representing us in the U.S. Senate, and I think, you know, her position on Indian affairs has been really important. And I don't know about you, but I continue to think about that seat in particular, coming from Minnesota and on Indian affairs, as Paul's seat, and as Paul Wellstone's seat, and that, you know, her voice there is really important, and we've seen it played out. As the member of the Senate Indian Affairs Committee, she fought to put Indian country at the forefront of the conversation when discussing federal relief efforts. Our office has partnered consistently with her in advocating for those things. And she secured the $8 billion in funding for tribal governments. It should have been 20. She fought for 20, but brought it home at $8 billion. And I think has a real sense that, you know, when that money was delayed, she stepped up immediately. And I'm so grateful. She was in the room into the wee hours of the morning, throwing down alongside Chuck Schumer, and that really matters. And not only that, but she authored a letter to the president and rallied her colleagues to sign it, which insisted that the Trump administration deploy the resources in a manner that was consistent with respect for tribal sovereignty and the principles of meaningful government-to-government consultation, which I will just say here because I can, in this forum, was completely lost on the Trump administration, and their behavior and engagement with Indian country has truly been destructive. And I look forward to electing a president who actually will engage with us and respects us. So with that, I am just again eternally grateful for her leadership, for her counsel, for her mentoring, and also to be that person that I can text in the middle of the night and be like, whoa, can you help me navigate through this situation? So with that, it's my real pleasure to be able to introduce our Senator Tina Smith.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Lieutenant Governor Flanagan. And back at you, you know that you and I are in touch usually many times during the week as we're seeking advice and counsel from each other. So I so value your advice to me every single day. And I want to thank Ken and Rachel for organizing this event. I'm just honored to be here with all of my fellow panelists, with Chair Dupuy and President Buck and Annette and Robert Lilligren, who I worked with when we were both in City Hall together, and Autumn and Secretary Strong. It's really, really great to be with all of you. I, like Peggy, I wish that we could all be together. I think that I crave community and engagement and connection with people, especially in this moment. As I speak to you from my apartment here in Washington, D.C., where I come to Washington and I work remotely in this apartment. I go to the floor of the United States Capitol and I vote against bad bills, and then I come back here and I work for you every single day. I want to just say that, you know, if we had gathered together a month or so ago, we would have talked about the economic and public health earthquake that has been the COVID epidemic, and we would have talked about how COVID is not the great equalizer. It is not affecting everybody the same. COVID disproportionately singles out people who have already challenges because they don't have a safe place to call home, because they live in chronic poverty, because they are Black and brown and indigenous, and they are dealing with the systemic racism that has been in our country since before we were even a country. But with the murder of George Floyd over Memorial Day weekend, this has not only pushed us all into, I think, a real moment of anguish and grief and anger and frustration, but also a sense of renewed purpose to address the need not only to get justice for George Floyd, but also to address the systems, the racist systems that hold Black and brown and indigenous people back every single day in every single way. I am so determined to make sure that in this moment, we do not squander this moment. We use it to make the kind of significant change that we need in our country, that is so far overdue, that is so deeply needed if we're going to fulfill the promise of freedom and opportunity for everybody in this country. And I think about my friends and allies and partners in Minnesota's tribal nations, as well as my friends and partners and allies in Minnesota's urban indigenous communities, and the work that we have to do together. I am so committed to doing that work with all of you. I'm eager to be a part of this conversation today and to listen to you, to hear from you, and then do everything I can to not only lift up your voices, but fight for you in Washington. Some of you have heard me say that when I found that I was going to be appointed to the United States Senate back in December of 2017, part of my negotiation was negotiating what committees I was going to be on. And I went and I said, I insist that I get to serve on the Indian Affairs Committee. And I was told, oh, that's fine. You can definitely do that. And that's when I first realized that not everybody in Washington, D.C. cares as much about these issues as I do. And it is, as Peggy said, it is the seat that Paul Wellstone held. His leadership on these issues and Al's leadership on these issues, I continue to think about as I fill these shoes and advocate with everybody who will listen to me, and even those who sometimes won't, about the importance of living up to the solemn moral responsibilities that we have to abide by and respect the trust relationship, the treaty responsibilities, and the respect for the rights of sovereign Indian nations to govern themselves in the way that they choose. So I'm grateful for this chance to be with all of you, and I want to thank you all for being with us, and I look forward to the conversation.
Steve McGuitch, Senator. Why don't we get started here? I want to start the conversation by talking about the provisions of the CARES Act and how they're aimed to assist tribes. So, Senator, if you maybe want to say a few things about that, and then if
Sure.
Tribal leadership, if you want to speak to how it's been affected, you've been affected by that.
Yes, thank you, Rachel. Well, when we first started putting together the CARES Act package, I advocated strongly for $20 billion to support tribal nations across the country, and in addition, additional funding for Indian Health Services and Bureau of Indian Education, all of the federal responsibilities to tribal communities, both on tribal land and also in urban areas. That is a part of our responsibility. As you know, we were able to get $8 billion, which was not the $20 billion. There are two issues that I want to just highlight on that. The first is that $8 billion was specifically constrained to be only for basically reimbursed for COVID-related expenses. So it does not come close to addressing the need that tribal governments have to replace the lost revenue that has happened and the increased needs in other areas that have happened because of COVID. So this is something that I continue to fight forward on for the next CARES Act package. Then the second thing with that $8 billion is it took for damn ever to get the Treasury Department to release those dollars. I think that most of the last money didn't even get released until something like June 8th or something. And so that has been a significant issue. Also real problems with lack of transparency from Treasury about how they made the decisions about how to allocate the funds. And I understand that those have been issues for Minnesota tribal governments. And so we have work to do here on this issue. And I, have been on the phone constantly with Mnuchin and with my leader and others working to continue to make progress. So we have work yet to do.
Thank you, Senator. Now, on the tribal end, what have been the challenges?
Well, obviously getting the money first and foremost has been the challenge. It was passed back in April, and we just finally got the last of the payment, I think it was last week. So this whole time, and that's something people don't understand. For tribes, our businesses are only source of income most times. We don't have the tax base that states or counties have. So when we decided to close down our businesses, we stopped all income we had. We had nothing coming in. So we had nothing to pay for our normal bills, our healthcare, our education, none of that. So to get that money was really important, but then that money wasn't even able to be used for replacement of revenue. So we still had to pay all those bills that we always had that we couldn't stop without any income coming in, on top of all the expenses that we now have because of COVID. So it's just been a horrible thing. And then like with our tribe, with the Prairie Island tribe, the numbers that they used, the formula that they used for the first round wasn't even accurate. We don't participate in the block grant, the Indian Health Block Grant or Indian Housing Block Grant bill that, or block grant that they used. So the numbers they used for us, we had never even had the opportunity to argue those numbers and try to get those numbers correct. So we were really shortchanged the first time around, and that still hasn't been addressed. It still hasn't been taken care of. And I want to thank Senator Smith for all her hard work that she's done for our tribe and for other tribes, but especially our tribe. We couldn't even get the numbers that the treasurer used for our tribe. We had to get Senator Smith involved, and she had, her and her staff had to force them to give her staff the numbers in order for us to even know what numbers they were using for us. So it's just, for our tribe, it's just been one thing after another. And I'm grateful that we've gotten the money that we have, but it's been hard, incredibly hard.
Thank you, President Buck. Red Lake?
I would like to kind of echo on what President Buck has shared. For Red Lake, I too agree that that first round, the data collection, the urgency, and the information that they collected, we scrambled, to pull together what we felt was representative of our nation. The second go around request for data, we had some reluctancy from some of our enterprises because they had been in or had received funding from SBA for the PPP. So they were kind of thinking, well, we're going to duplicate. And I thought, well, no, I think what I understood was the data they needed, they wanted a complete picture of our nation. So again, the reluctancy for the data collection and, how is this going to be used? We want to base it on our tribal membership because, we still have members to serve. We have the urban population as well. So I think those are some of the things that we faced. And then the changing guidelines or more clarification on some of the questions we've had. Today, they just released another update on the Treasury CARES Act funding. So I've started to kind of go through it, and I thought, okay, well, if we set something in place now, we got to make sure that it follows the requested guidance that they've published. So that's been a little frustrating for us here in Red Lake, is to kind of go through and determine, will this be allowed? Here's our need. We have a great need. And again, we're thankful too for the funding that we received, but the way it was approached, it created a lot of concern, I guess, just, making sure that we had submitted the right information and that we weren't going to duplicate or compromise an enterprise's ability, and that they would be on the hook to pay back funding. So I guess that's all I can say for now about Red Lake. Miigwech.
Thank you, Treasurer Johnson. Any other panelists have anything to add to that?
Yes, this is Chairman Dupuy from Fond du Lac. I would like to say to get and put in perspective about the revenue that came down from the CARES Act, we have to look at the beginning of it. And it goes back for a very long ways that we've never got 100% funding that's been guaranteed to us. So anytime that tribal leaders or in tribal government for a while realize and know that when there's money that's appropriated or allocated to tribes, we always have to wait. With this one, it was very interesting. Yes, we know Tina Smith pushed for the 20 billion, but we only received 8, and we appreciate that. We appreciate everything she's done, and to our lieutenant governor also. But what it means is to the tribes is, one, we're the most regulated people on the planet, even inside the structure of the United States where we live. We do know how to, if anybody in the country knows how to stretch the dollar, it's Indian country. The biggest thing is we ask is discretionary funding or non-discretionary funding, where allow us with flexible funding to receive it, and we have the data to show what we have done as tribes with the infrastructure of our reservations and our homes, and what we've done with casino and gaming and other business and corporations that tribes have established. Give us the tools and the resources to allow us to take care of our people for the present and to the future of our unborn. But going back to the CARES Act money in itself, it starts off with there's a large amount of appropriation of revenue from the CDC transferred to the Treasury. Nobody knows how to disperse it to the tribes. Why is that? That's the big concern. And it's hard to come in front after other tribal leaders have spoken, because a lot of the stuff that we're going to say is the same thing. To President Buck, when she opened up, is the reality is we didn't know how much money was going to come. We didn't know how it was going to be broken down. Most importantly, when it was, we wanted to know when the money was going to come. Because to her point, we shut down everything. Once we closed our casino, we shut down the goose that laid the golden leg. That's our biggest piece of revenue. That's what supports everything that we do. And to shut that down and to not know what's coming. We know there's revenue that exists out there, but what's coming? And then all the restrictions that come behind the revenue that the tribes, again, have to jump through hoop after hoop after hoop after hoop to figure out how we're going to do this and break this down. Give us the ability, and this goes from today to the future, is allow the tribes to receive this funding. If it's a data principle that they want to see, well then fine, we'll give the data to what we do with the money, but they'll see that we've been able to take this money, we've been able to build our infrastructures that we live in, and most importantly, take care of our people. And so them are the big keys that with any kind of revenue that comes down at that level. To not know how they're going to fund it, to me, was one of the most ridiculous things I heard, because there is funding principles that have been established through IHS, and the inequities that come when something happens like that. And then they also put us with the Alaska Natives, who are indigenous, put us at a fight over revenue on how the bill was made. That is not right. And we should learn from this from now on, however this works out. If it's going to be that, we look out for indigenous as is. And if the act is going to say the federally recognized tribes, you have to look back and go, how could somebody think of that, knowing that you had all these corporations with the Alaska Natives in Alaska? And so the first pot of money that came in, it's there. It's definitely helped us moving forward what we need to do. The second pot of money that came in is definitely doing the same thing. We're taking care of what we know how to take care of. We keep very, very accurate records of what we do, and to ensure that we carry out these things the right way. The biggest concern is, how is this gonna move forward with it? If there's waiver principles, are these waiver principles gonna be applied after COVID? I don't think they will. Some of the same arguments that we have within the state is, how much of this that's going on during the COVID pandemic are we gonna be able to move forward with? And if there's things that are waivers that the tribes are continually looking for, and it's basically saying, let us spend the money the way we know how to spend the money. We can prove that we can show you by data that we spend the money the right way. I think that's the biggest thing. The CARES Act money that came in definitely helped us do what we need to do right now to continue to move into the future. But it's going to come back. The scary piece is, if it spikes, what happens again? Do the tribes have to shut down their resources again? and move forward, and then be the last to receive PPE, be the last to, again, to receive the supplies and issues that are needed to protect your community. So it was a scary, I shouldn't say scary, but it was a concern how things came out to be. And the concern as tribal leaders to look out for the fiduciary responsibilities that they have to their membership and to their bands or tribes to ensure that we get this. And sometimes we fight all the time to protect our borders, to protect our principles of sovereignty, and it shouldn't be that way. So however it moves forward in the future today, from this point on, is to ensure that the trust responsibilities that are guaranteed by the United States government are turned over to the tribes in that manner to ensure that we're able to protect and preserve our rights as our people and their communities. Miigwech.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you bringing up the future too, because everything that we do, we have in mind the next 7 generations, and you're really hitting that on the head as far as having to be mindful about that future. So I appreciate you speaking to that. Secretary Strong, I know you wanted to say something, so I'm gonna, are you unmuted now? Oh,
I am.
yay.
Okay,
Okay,
yep.
good.
So yeah, I first want to say, bonjour, bimose, gnu indígena kasma kundu dem, misquagamui, zargani and donjaba. Hello, everyone, and thank you for taking the time to hear our concerns, and also our thanks for the hard work. I know for us, you know, obviously the increase in resources through the CARES Act was incredibly beneficial. You know, we're dealing with something that basically, as everyone has talked about, is exposing all the disparities that exist within all of our communities. The disparities within housing, within healthcare, within really all levels of our government. You know, those fiduciary responsibilities of the government within our treaties is not being held up. And I think everyone on this call agrees with that. And I think within that same vein, although the funding is extremely beneficial, some of the limitations with how it was distributed, the timing, as well as the complications with, you know, the complexity and the ever-changing limitations on how to use those funds can be very complex. And I know for us in Red Lake, I want to give kudos to our treasurer. You know, we were operating on a very limited budget. You know, we had shut down our gaming establishment, which provides very critical funding for our necessary services. And, you know, basically we were trying to engage in planning activities and prepare our nation for this crisis without really knowing when the money was going to come, what it could be used for. And so within that, we had to make some decisions that really were put us in a bad place. And I think, you know, that could be improved, the timing of the release of the funds, and still to this day, understanding what they could be used for. I think for us, you know, we operate on a year-to-year basis, much like other tribes, and the thought of having to repay the money could have very detrimental effects. And so, you know, from my standpoint, we know these disparities exist within housing, healthcare, et cetera, education. And so for us, you know, I think it would have been a more appropriate, if you think of these funding mechanisms that Kevin and other leaders have talked about, would be to provide more leeway, you know, considering we know that, you know, we have the worst housing, you know, considering we know that our people are afflicted with diabetes and heart disease at unprecedented levels. And we know that this has occurred because of the lack of the trust responsibility from the federal government. And so, you know, for the government to then put more limitations when they know these disparities exist is somewhat limiting. And I think it's inappropriate for the situation. I think for me, I'm very thankful for the hard work that everyone's put into getting the dollars to us. I know in the very beginning, the state stepped up when we really were unsure of the federal funding, and so that was beneficial. With that being said, you know, we're very much in need of more resources on an annual basis for all these needs. And because of COVID, you know, we're really seeing the effects of these long-term shortages in housing and healthcare and all the aforementioned shortages that we all see within our community. So for me, you know, it's a learning process. Obviously, we're all thankful for the dollars. I think each one of us would agree that there's a lack of clarity on how to spend those dollars. And as a tribe, that, you know, we don't have those reserves to pay for something that might be later seen as a non-allowable expense. And so, you know, it puts us in a hard position. And so for me, I think more clarity, but really more leeway in the categories of funding. You know, I think it would be very easy to look at the tribes and say, hey, these disparities exist. If you're addressing these disparities that lower your risk of transmission, then, you know, we're going to give you clear, concise guidance up front that it's okay and that you guys should engage in some of these more complicated projects that are going to take some time to put in place and to really complete. And so there's a lot of good things that I think have come out of this. You know, we're looking at our housing, we're looking at our healthcare numbers, we're looking at the number of people that have diabetes, that have other ailments that are related to diet, that are related to funding for those nutrition programs, and that are related to, you know, the lack of funding from both state and federal entities. And so I'm very much appreciative of everyone's worth. And I think sometimes we lose that, you know. I think that if everyone shared the same passion that the leaders on this call share, we would see change. And the truth is, we need to step outside the box and really make sure this message is heard by everyone. So when the decisions are being made, they're being made with the truth of what's happening out there. And I think when you do that, when you show the truth of the reality of these disparities, I think people will be far more willing to allow for more lenient funding streams to exist that can really help each tribe, empower each tribe to become a part of their own solution, not only with planning, but with, you know, long-term sustainability. And so I think for me, I just want to say miigwech, and it's really, I'm really thankful you guys are here. If it wasn't for the leaders on this call, I feel like our voice would have been forgotten. And so miigwech for that.
Miigwech, Nigel.
All right. Thank you so much, Secretary Strong. I want to move on to our urban population and talk about the needs in the urban community as we are looking at post-pandemic and also civil unrest. Obviously, there have been a lot of things happening and wrapped up in one another. So perhaps if Robert and Autumn, if you would like to address that, please.
Hi. Thank you, Lieutenant Governor and U.S. Senator for being here today to listen to us. So a lot of people know that I work for AICDC in housing, and I also represent the Metropolitan Urban Indian Directors on our Minnesota Interagency Homelessness Council. And one of the things that's been very alarming during this pandemic, and then, you know, the riots and everything that has happened, one of the things that we understand is that the housing crisis right now all over Minnesota is everywhere. It's not just in the urban Indian area. So one of the things with that is that it takes about 2 to 2.5 years for developers to start even building affordable housing. Right now, we have multiple hotels that are filled to the brim with folks that are unsheltered. Right now, there's been an occupation. There's been Powderhorn Park has been occupied by an encampment. We have a large encampment growing behind IPT, or Indigenous Peoples Task Force. And one of the things that we're really passionate about, what we want to know is, how do we get the resources directly into the hands of Native specific developers, and how do we expedite that so the process happens quicker? We are in a very huge crisis right now. Where are the folks going to go that are staying in hotels? Where are the folks our relatives going to go that are staying in encampments? And yes, that executive order protects them for right now, but it doesn't protect them from danger and COVID-19 and all of the things that they face. So I guess my question is, what can be done and how fast?
Yeah, did you want to stop, Rachel, and answer the question, or should I just continue?
Feel free to go ahead, Robert.
Yeah, miigwech. And I just want to say miigwech to the senator, to our lieutenant governor for holding this roundtable, for including the urban Indian voice. It is an honor to be amongst this tribal leadership and to be in partnership with y'all. And I also want to say miigwech to so many of the tribal leadership and tribal members who came down to the metropolitan area after the murder of George Floyd and help protect our community here. It was an incredibly beautiful expression of collaboration and of community that really protected our assets, our businesses on East Franklin. Little Earth protectors stepped forward, and it's something that should really be commended and recognized. And as we I want to lift up the issues of employment and jobs and businesses and economic development in the urban Indian community. And I'm part of our regional government here, the Metropolitan Council, and our research in early May showed that the unemployment in our region for Native people was at 47% because of the nature of the jobs that were lost due to COVID, and then the losses have been compounded with the civil unrest. And so one of the things, I have access to conversations about resources here. I just recently joined the City of Minneapolis Forward Coalition core strategy group that's going to advise the city on its investments, its economic investments post-pandemic and post-civil unrest. And one of the things that I see happening that I'm concerned with is that because our community came together, we protected our people, we protected our Native assets, but we also protected our neighbors and our non-Native communities and their assets. So Franklin Avenue didn't burn, Little Earth didn't burn. And those are places that one I would think would be the first to burn during civil unrest. And so I see that as we pick these corridors where there was a lot of damage, and we do need to engage those communities in reinvestment, rebuilding, so communities come back stronger. We need to make sure that the urban Indian communities are included, that just because East Franklin Avenue didn't burn, because our communities stepped forward and protected it, Native people weren't doing all that great before the pandemic and before the civil unrest. And so I just want to make sure, Senator, Lieutenant Governor, that as we're talking about resources and really identifying these corridors, East Lake Street, West Broadway, where a lot of damage was done and a lot of focus needs to happen, that we're including the urban Indian community so that we're not losing ground in whatever comes through rebuilding and reinvestment. Miigwech.
Thank you. Maybe I could just respond. I'd love to hear what Peggy is thinking about at the federal level too, but thank you very much, Robert and Autumn too, for those comments. So when I want to say kind of two things quickly. The first is that when I went to visit and I saw the burned out shell of McGeezy, which is so heartbreaking, and saw the damage done because of the civil unrest, and have talked with community leaders. What I have been hearing is that it is very important that that we get resources in but that the leadership comes from the community and not from Washington, D.C., or even from St. Paul, that there is an opportunity here to lift up and to build capacity amongst the community leaders that know best how they want that community to be rebuilt. And let's be clear, there are great threats here. We have, not only we have great damage, but also we have the question of how is it going to be rebuilt. We do not want to find out at the end of this that we have completely gentrified a part of the city that would therefore mean that, that people have lost their neighborhood twice. Once because of the damage done through the civil unrest, and second, again, because somebody bought up their homes, bought up their stores, bought up their streets, and turned it into Noodles and Company and Total Wine, as opposed to the institutions in the community that make it the community that it should be. So I'm working hard to, and I very much want to keep on working with you to figure out how we can do that. How can we bring resources? I'm working on federal legislation to do that, but it seems important that it isn't rushed, so that the money is there, but the planning and the development can happen at the from the local level. That's where the ideas are going to come from. The second thing I want to say is more broadly around the systemic challenges that we see in all of these communities. And I want to just be clear about something. Sometimes we talk about this in terms of saying our housing system is broken, or our systems around protecting environmental quality are broken, or wage and wealth policies are broken. I actually don't think that broken is the right word. I think we need to understand that these policies were designed this way. They are that way on purpose. And so until we can understand that and grapple with it and understand it truly, that's what it's going to take to fix it. Because the reason that there is such a shortage of housing in Little Earth is because that's the way it was designed, to withhold resources from urban indigenous communities to keep you down. That is what racist policy looks like. So I approach it in that way, and I wanted to share that with all of you because I think this is the breakthrough that we need in this moment from policymakers in Washington who honestly are almost completely white. And unless they can say that and understand that, we're not going to get through.
Thank you for that, because that was definitely speaking truth to power right there. And I know that you have to go, Senator. So I just want to say thank you for your time. And I'm pretty sure I can safely speak for everyone when I say I appreciate your representation of us in DC.
Well, thank you so much. It does my heart good to be with all of you virtually, if not in person, and be safe and be well, and we'll be talking a lot and all the time.
Chief Miigwech.
Thank you.
Lieutenant Governor Flanagan, I know that you had indicated you were, if we could unmute Lieutenant Governor Flanagan, she has a response. Please.
Great, thank you so much. So Autumn, to your question, and just generally, I just want to thank you again for just your work. You're doing the work on the front lines with our people, and I am so grateful for you all day, every day. And I wanted to just say that we just got through an interesting legislative session, and I use interesting in the most Minnesota way possible, that the Senate walked away without having a deal, and part of that deal was related to the housing assistance that is so desperately needed, as the first step that the governor took, to your point, was to have the moratorium on evictions. And the second step is the need to pass this housing assistance. There are dollars that are available through the CARES Act that, frankly, if the legislature doesn't do it, we just got to do it. And I think that is where we're headed. But I would also say that we are in a housing crisis before this hit. And that, you know, what we asked for in both the housing infrastructure bonds and additional bonds to maintain public housing, it's the most that a governor's administration has ever asked for. And we need to keep asking for more. And I think that that's just on like everybody on this call as well. We've been able to, through some of the CARES Act funding, to rapidly get our community members, many of them, off of the street when COVID happened and into hotels, about 2,100 folks. And that's great. And we have many of our relatives who are sleeping outside at Powderhorn. And so we are in conversations with the city and the county about what is possible there for some shared leadership about what that response looks like, but it has to be done in partnership with the community. So I am eager to continue this conversation with you and with others offline about that response. But the ask that I would have is just continuing to advocate for the legislature to really commit to, frankly, what is a need all across the state. This is not an urban issue. It's not a greater Minnesota issue. It's really about the legislature stepping up with the purse strings and saying, we're going to commit to this issue, both in response to COVID, but just it's been a long time coming, and we are in a housing crisis. So we'll keep it up, but that is the housing assistance money will come out one way or the other. Either the legislature will act or we'll just do it ourselves.
Chief McGuitch. I would like to, if we can now, talk about voting and how we think that will look as we move forward with our primary in August and then the general election in November. Anybody can chime in on this one. Urban, tribal.
Well, we've got here at Prairie Island, we've got a really great crew in our government relations department that have been working hard, not only this year, but even in years past, on getting our community connected and wanting to do this wonderful thing called voting. So they're going to be working with our community to see what questions or concerns they have with voting, trying to get them set up if they want to vote early or even do it via email or via mail. We're also working on getting a polling place, a satellite polling place for our reservation, so our elders don't have to go out and sit in line with a bunch of other folk who might possibly contract COVID. So we're working on a lot of different things like that, and just urging our communities to continue to be involved in voting. It's so important. I think we all see now the importance of that. We've seen the importance of that for years. We have legislators on both local, state, and federal that are creating these laws that affect us without even knowing anything about us. And until we get people who are educated enough or willing to learn about tribes and what their decisions do to us, it's never going to stop. So I think, that's our highest priority. We want to make sure our people are safe in the ability to vote, but we also want them to be energized and excited to vote. So our team's been doing a really great job trying to come up with a lot of fun ideas and fun things for our people to do to keep involved.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. This is Robert. And here through NACD and in the community, we have a long-standing program that will make voting a tradition, voter engagement in the political process. And our strategies relied on a lot of events and people coming together, which are no longer available to us. And we're rapidly shifting our strategy to mail-in ballots and using our networks and contacts to make sure that every Native vote in our community every Native voter is getting a ballot and then returning those ballots. And it's labor intensive and resource intensive, but it seems to be our best strategy now. And I'll also just note that we're also overlaying our census outreach and census work with our voter outreach work as well, because that's another community that may be undercounted, whether that's through voting or for census. So we've been combining those efforts to make voting a tradition.
Thank you, Robert.
This is Sam Strong. Yeah, I have a couple comments. I anticipate there being a low turnout. I think, as Robert talked about, a lot of the initiatives that we have to get our people to vote involve bringing people together, large gatherings. That's kind of our way of life, if you will, when you think about powwows, et cetera. And so I think for us to engage the community, even to previous numbers, it's going to be incredibly hard. We're going to have to start thinking about new social media strategies. And really, the thing for red leg voters that gets us out to vote is, how does it impact us? And I've seen that in recent elections, but also in the last tribal election, as an example. We had a referendum question on medical marijuana, and we received 82% support for that initiative. And we actually had more participation in this, if you want to call it a midterm election, for just representatives, not the tribal officers, than we saw in the previous one. And the way that we overcame the COVID crisis was through absentee balloting. But ultimately, it really came down to there was an issue on the ballot that people were interested in. And it was something that they could relate to. And I know for our presidential election, I think there's a lot of people that obviously always vote. And in this election, I'm sure there will be people that vote because of the atrocities of our commander-in-chief. However, how relatable is some of that to their everyday life? You know, how relatable is the state elections? And I think right now, I don't really see much of a presence up here when it comes to the state elections. In fact, I kind of think we're forgotten sometimes. And so engaging our people in the local elections is kind of a lost part of the getting people involved. We're kind of forgotten, if you will. And I think that's a big problem. And if you look at tribal elections, as opposed to state elections, you know, we see about half the number of people vote. And the reason being is that when they're electing tribal officers, they see an opportunity to impact their day-to-day lives. You know, we are able to benefit them, or in some cases, some may think that we impact them negatively, right? Either way, they're participating. And I think for our people, if we were able to make relatable, relatable ways to get them involved, I think that would be the more empowering tool. For us, you know, we're less interested in, some of the more complex policy stances, but we're more interested in what does this mean for some of our programs. I know that's one of the things that we've done is, you know, how is this going to impact our day-to-day lives? And that's always the struggle, but even more so with our people. You know, you got to find something that energizes our people. For us, in this past election, it was medical marijuana. But what is that topic? I don't necessarily have that off the top of my head, but I'm very much open to hearing other people's ideas on how to mobilize. And focusing on one simple topic, I think, could really help energize people to say, hey, if we get to the polls and we're able to elect a state government that represents us, potentially we could solve our housing crisis, or whatever it may be that people are really in tune with. And so I think that would be my thought, is how do we find something that really energizes the people? And then how do we ensure that they have access to, the absentee process for the state and the federal elections?
I appreciate that, Sam, because as Native Engagement Director for the DFL, my job is to get out the vote for tribes. So having said that, I definitely think that you are speaking to the thoughts and what I've been hearing, and it's really going to come down to really garnering that interest. And I think one of the approaches that I have thought about is breaking down, you know, what the what the offices are, what they do, how the decisions that they make impact people's lives. And I think when people have a better understanding of that, I think there's a little bit more investment. And I think too, like you said, you know, when there's something that people get excited about, there's more investment in that as well. So we do have an app that we are using here at the DFL called Team that is, it's about relational networking. And as Indigenous people, we are very relational in how we do things. And I think this is going to be the key to how we're going to be able to organize, you know, tribal people in order to get out the vote. And so I will be following up with tribal leadership on how we can utilize this app to get out the vote and get people excited about issues that matter. So, well, we are at 5:33, so I'm afraid I'm going to have to wrap it up. Know how much I appreciate everyone taking the time to join us today. I think we could have probably been on this call for a lot longer, but I know that the show must go on. But I think everyone got a glimpse of what it is that tribes are facing in the COVID era, just in the infrastructure of funding, underfunding, etc. So, Chimagwich, if I'm going to put my contact information in the, I'm typing my email in here. So if anyone wants to reach me with any like follow-up questions or anything, this is being recorded so we could make this available to people after the fact as well. Again, Chimagwich, and follow up with any questions that you might have. So perhaps we'll be able to do this at a later date as well on another topic. So panelists, I appreciate you taking the time to be a part of this discussion, and everyone who joined us, thank you for your time as well.
Miigwech, woman.
Gigawabamin.
Gigawabamin, everybody.
Padamayaye.
Oh.